Hello, everyone. Welcome to my little talk about 500,000 players, zero offices. Basically, how we, as a company, for the past 8 years, have operated and grown with it and sort of claimed a little bit of our space within the casual gaming market without any big operations, without an office, basically all working from home. So before I go into more detail about that and share some of our insights and advice about that, a little bit about me. My name is Martine Spaans, and I've been in the online gaming industry for more than 10 years, almost 12 years now, I think. For the last 8 years, I've been working on Tamalaki, my own mobile game publishing company. Highly specialized in hidden objects, match 3, time management, simulation games. Over the course of the time, more than 100 games released. A lot of those were like really sort of, back in the day, old school, like really small games where you just basically have a level pack of 20 hidden object levels and then you're done. But obviously over the course of the years, we pivoted more towards a free-to-play business model. And currently, we're still operating about 10 games in the free-to-play business model. We've always been doing that in cooperation with our partner, FGL. They're a US-based company, and we're both tiny, but with combined strength, we can make it all work. So I thought the best introduction here is to just show you a video of one of our hit games. This is Home Designer Blast. And I'll let the video do the rest. Sorry. All right, so I hope that that worked out without being all too choppy. But yeah, that was our hit game, Home Designer Blast, with color block blasting and home designing combined. So anyway, 500,000 players, zero offices. There'll be some advice in this talk that can be applied to all kinds of game studios, not just like studios without an office. One of those pieces of advice that I want to kick off with is one of those sort of general ones that I think can be applied to any small studio, whether you have an office or not. Number one, focus on the things you're good at. Everyone always says not to put all your eggs in one basket, but I think the opposite is a risk as well. If you spread yourself and your team's attention way too thin, then you won't be able to give a proper amount of attention to all the products that you're running. How much that exactly should be depends definitely on you and your team. But for example, the way that we operated is our main development studio of all these games is in Indonesia, and they put about 70% of their time in updates and live ops for Home Designer Blast. Then about 20% of their time on updating and porting older titles for some extra cash in the bank. And then the remaining 10% is working on new game ideas, because of course Home Designer Blast is not gonna remain a revenue stream forever. In the meantime, we need to work on some new ideas as well for whenever that revenue stream is going to dry up. But anyway, even working like that, it's still 100% casual projects that we focus on. It's not like all of a sudden we're going to develop a PvP real-time battle sim or something. And I'm sure some guys in the dev team would love that because they love to play those games in their spare time. But with the current stable team setup, it's just not realistic to allocate resources to that and to sort of completely enter that new learning cycle that comes with completely new genre. Where your ambitions lie, I'd say, it's good to at least line up the vision of your studio and stick to that. And yes, we are aware that the current sort of this lineup of games is lacking some diversity. But I'm also very happy to say that we're definitely working on that as well. Most of the screenshots here are icons here are from some of the older games that we've operated over the last 8 years. So yeah, distributed office. That means that we can work with basically someone anywhere in the world. We're not sort of restricted to choose talent from just like one geo. We work with a lot of freelancers. It could be seen as a liability. However, none of our outsourced freelancing roles are sort of forming a risk in continuity of the game projects. For example, some of these freelancer roles are for customer support, for creation of marketing creatives, for the localization. And it definitely still requires effort in training and hiring when we have to like replace one of them, but it's not an immediate threat to the production timeline. So so far the continuity isn't at like a higher risk than it would be with regular staffing contracts. And with our freelancers, we're only interested in long-term partnerships. And yeah, our freelancers typically stay with us for at least a year and a half. And I don't think that is significantly shorter than it would be with a regular staffing contract. On the map, I tried to sort of map out where our staff is located. The flags in there are tiny, but at least it gives you some idea of how distributed we are. Having said that, this style of working is definitely not for everyone. You have to be able to really work fairly autonomously. So, we're all across several different time zones. Everyone has their own work rhythm. Like, I'm more of an early riser, but someone else in our team is definitely more of a night owl, for example. So we only talk to each other in the mornings. And it has happened to me that like a new hire, someone who knew we hired, she felt really lost and not sure what to do, or they had like trouble figuring out their work-life balance without the frame of office hours. So some things can be taught, of course, given the time to adjust. But if you see after a month or so that it's still really not working out, then it's a good moment to talk about it. And parting ways might be sort of a relief to both parties, as it was, for example, in our example, in our situation that we had. Or even when you're a small studio with an office, I think in a small team, basically everyone is end responsible for some parts of the project, and there are no standard procedures. There's no employee welcome pack. So when you have a new hire, they're pretty much sort of on their own to figure things out. I think it's good to realize that that just might not work for everyone. Kind of leads into the next point about trust. So I can understand it might feel like sort of a big issue when you don't have eyes on your staff all the time. However, in my experience, it's something that you can only sort of harvest after you sow. A part of our contract to have like flexible hours. We never use any method to track the hours. If customer support, for example, tells me that they needed like 5 more hours this week to like answer all the bug complaints that the latest build caused, then I believe them. I don't feel a need to sort of check if they're really telling the truth. And I've never had anyone taken advantage of this way. By giving trust, I get it back. Obviously, this is not a guarantee. It can always happen. But I think you will notice soon enough when something's amiss. Yeah, tools, obviously. Managing all kinds of third-party office tools can feel a little bit like a task on its own. So I personally prefer to keep it rather simple. We use Dropbox and Google Drive for sharing files. We use Trello for keeping a list of all our tasks. We use Discord for internal communication, and Skype and Slack for communication with our partners, depending whatever the partner prefers. I have resisted the request to start using Microsoft Teams. Definitely nothing against Teams, but it's just like another tool. And I think enough is enough. We're not lacking ways to talk to another, and like these tools that should help you shouldn't end up feeling like more of a burden, like, oh, another communication source that you have to check. So yeah, this is definitely sort of the limitation that I personally have for all kinds of communication tools. I would also recommend against trying to create your own system. Don't forget that you're a games company. You make games. You do not make tools. The tools that are out there might not cover 100% of everything you want them to do, but for like the 5% of functionalities that you're missing, it doesn't make sense to spend 50 hours developing something that will. I was once in a startup where first we had like a daily post-it board for the Scrum meetings, and then that was turned into a digital version. And then the plan came up to make that into a product and start selling it. And before we even had like our core product off the ground, the team was already divided into working on the second thing on the side. And it actually wasn't something that anyone was passionate about. So it didn't really make sense for us to do that. And I guess as a side note, the same goes for building your own game engine. I understand you might be in a situation where it seems that not any of the engines out there currently do that exact little small thing you want your game to do. But I think it's important to make a choice that if you're either like an engine company or a games company. And if you're a games company, then go with an engine that's already out there in the market and that plays along nicely with all the other things that you will end up needing to integrate, like ad networks, analytics, anti-fraud tools, etc. And creating your own engine, it sounds really cool, but if you're not an engine company, I'm pretty sure it's going to bite you in the ass later when the time comes that you will need to play nicely with all these other ad networks and things out there. So. Anyway, it just happens quite a few too many times that I talk to developers who are working on their own engine. So it's something that I kind of felt the need saying. Operating lean means that you also should design your process lean. And from this, I like to take a reference from the automotive industry, as I'm quite a car freak myself. So in 2005, Toyota, Peugeot, and Citroën, they came out with a small budget hatchback, and they developed it together. So that's kind of the first point. It was a cooperation to spread risk and costs. And this little car, it didn't mean that it was cheaply designed, but it was designed to be cheap and to run cheap. The car makers, for example, carefully thought about ways to save money without compromising the product. So, for example, there's like a picture of the back here. And to access the boot, you only had to open the rear window. This would mean that the whole structure of the boot, it was very light because it didn't have like that entire frame that it needed to lift up. And because the weight that needed to lift up was so much lighter, this car only needed one gas spring to lift up the boot lid instead of the conventional 2 gas springs that you see. Another example is the front window. It only had one very long wiper instead of the 2 shorter ones. And there are numerous of tiny little inventions that probably took a lot of resources to develop. The whole development process of this car probably took a lot longer than any other tiny hatchback. But then the cost saved in the long run, so this car could make a decent profit margin while still selling the car at a budget price, that made it all worth it. And I think this method can be applied to game development as well. So in our game Home Designer Blast, we constantly work on adding new and exciting features and levels. But before we release such a feature, we spend a lot of time on optimizing the process. So for example, this level of the day feature, there isn't a manual process to like design every level by hand. But before releasing this feature, we automated the process of releasing it as an AI-generated level. And by thinking ahead, like a little bit more like this, you end up spending a little bit more resources up front, but you can save yourself a lot of expensive live upworks later. And if you want to stay lean, then I think it's also important to kind of keep your focus and kind of keep focusing on what you're good at. And as long as that sort of pie of revenue keeps growing, I am more than happy to give away more pieces of the pie. So if you want to do everything in-house, then you have to like grow your team internally and grow your risks also, basically. But if you cooperate with partners who have the right expertise in that field, you will save yourself the investment of having to gather all that expertise yourself, and you save yourself the cost of doing all that research and development. So here's like a few examples of the partners that we chose to work with. For some PC distribution, Big Fish and Game House, and then for some, Automatum is like a mobile local partner that we work with for the Middle East, where they are going to release Home Designer Blast in Arabic. And Pleiades is another sort of mobile alternative distribution network. Sometimes the argument against using partners is, what if we end up earning hundreds of thousands of dollars per year and we have to give away half of it? That is a good problem to have. I would not feel sorry for you if you have that problem. I would love to have that problem. And that is also why we decided definitely sort of not to worry about that as long as it doesn't apply. Events. Interesting thing to talk about at a digital event. I decided to show these pictures as an example because these pictures are 10 years apart. And I think a big part of establishing myself in the mobile publisher space is due to the fact that I engage in a lot of speaking opportunities. So during those 10 years, I've created roughly 20 unique talks, participated in like roughly the same amount of expert panels. Not because I love to hear myself talk, but mostly because I keep getting like really positive feedback on the things that I share. And it turns out that the things that I've learned over the past decades could be really useful to other people as well. So I think information only has value when it's shared and not when it's like kept behind closed doors. So thanks to all that sharing, I've built up more value for my tiny little company and my games. So it ended up that no matter how small my studio is, I can still make it like really, really significant. And right now, thanks to the situation we're in, due to digital events, it might even be easier for you to represent and to share your knowledge. There's no high travel costs at the moment, no visa requirements, just you and your story and your webcam. So I would recommend check out all the upcoming conferences for this summer. There's quite a few coming up, and see where you can share. Growing is a choice sometimes, and we with Tamalaki we have chosen not to raise funds and grow that fast, and I think this has to do with a personal preference. If I would grow the company, I would have to make a substantial amount more revenue to cover all the costs. And of course, that might mean that taking the focus on our games away from the less profitable projects and experiments that we're running, and then fully focus only on our hit games. We've considered something like this in the past, but I've talked it also over with my business partner from FGL, and we just decided that that's not something we desire. I enjoy talking to developers. I enjoy brainstorming about game design. I love thinking of new concepts and trying out new tiny little iterations in the game to see what sticks. And I really love that hands-on approach. And I know that I would have to let that go and delegate it all to someone, or just like only do what the data tells us to do if we decided to grow and seek investment, for example. Also, another point why I think that we wouldn't probably even be interesting for investment is we decided from the get-go that we always want to let the developer keep their IP. We're only interested in the publishing rights because I think it just makes much more sense to let the developer sort of retain their full control and ownership over the product that they made. But it is a choice. When I made that choice, I did know that it was going to make my company as a publisher less valuable on paper because we only have the publishing rights and not the IP. So, again, that is from a publisher point of view also kind of a reason and also an effect why growth is not so interesting for us. Last one. It kind of makes me giggle. It may sound a little bit too harsh, but I think by keeping the business afloat is already kind of tough enough in the games industry without chasing unicorns. And it happens quite a lot that I talk with indie developers who have just started their studio, they just formed their team, and they dive like straight into making that dream RPG with open world multiplayer and everything. Just, please don't. I would say don't forget that the studios who do these type of games, they work with multi-million-dollar budgets and hundreds of employees. And it's just incredibly difficult to pull off. I'm sad that I had to miss the talk a little bit earlier about Pine. It's a game that I closely followed on the crowdfunding side, and I think it's definitely incredible what those guys pulled off. But I think they would probably also be the first ones to admit that it wasn't easy. So, I'd say start small, just build up a good financial buffer for your studio, do some work for hire if you need to, do what you're good at, and start development of your own IP from a safe space, from a comfortable space. And that was pretty much it. Thanks all for listening, and I believe that there is time for questions.
Hi, Martine.
Hey.
Hi, good to see you. You said that you don't love to hear yourself talk. Well, we do love to hear you talk, so thank you very much for those insights. I do have a couple of questions, and there is a chat that I'm following, so I'll just get into mine first. I was wondering, when you talked about a small team and like the way that a huge personality can impact a small team, and the way you work in general, what does your hiring process like? Do you have like different strategies for that because of the way you work?
Yeah, it's interesting that I do exactly the opposite of what everyone always tells you, because they always say like, don't hire your friends. That's exactly what I did. I worked for a while with my own cousin. She helped us with customer support, and she was acing it. She was really good at it. There's two other people from the games industry who I have grown very close with over the years, who started helping me out in the freelance space. And I think that as long as you just put everything on paper and be really clear about the job responsibilities, the role, things like that, I think we've proven that it actually can work out to hire some people you're close with.
Great. And another question, and I saw all of those titles in one of your slides in the beginning. What's the most difficult part of juggling those? What, like you talked about the percentage of work that goes into each part of the company, but you have to juggle a ton of titles. What's the most difficult part about that?
Yeah, the most stressful times are when all of a sudden Google or Apple says like, well, now you have to implement this in all your games. I remember, for example, on the Google side, first it was all like 32-bit and then became like 64, and you had to like support that as well. And, all of our older games were made in Adobe Air. So it was, kind of outdated and hard to update. But some of those titles were still actually making good money. So there's one of those titles that we've decided to convert to Unity, which was, of course, a huge time sink, but in the end was worth it. And some of those we just had to sunset because the tech was just really not up to it anymore to be updated. So I guess, when like Google or Apple drops something on top of you like that without a warning, and then you have to like make that all work within, well, usually you get a few months to make it work.
Right.
But that is, those are sometimes the most stressful times.
And one last question: you compared the lean process that you have to the development of a car. If you had to name one car brand that Tamalaki kind of is the most, like, what would a car brand be? What would your car brand be?
Oh, that's a good question.
You're a car freak, so.
Well, I am, but you know, I've never like thought about it in relationship to how I run Tamalaki. It would
It's a bit of a
probably
branding question.
Yeah, I think you know, personally, I like love Aston Martin, but I'm not going to compare my own company to that. I
That's
think
different, huh?
personally, we are a little bit more of a like Skoda in terms of we don't do super innovative things with our games, but we
Mm-hmm.
make really solid products that you know appeal to a wide audience. And
Yeah.
you know we've been sort of a long time player in this industry.
That sounds great, and you don't have to be apologetic about that at all. I mean, you're doing great. So this is all we had time for right now. Martine, I would like to thank you very much.